First off, how are you doing? How has the last 16 months been for you?
Well, wow. Yeah. I mean,
That's a loaded question
it's,
on its own.
so first and foremost, everyone, in my family is well and healthy. I'm very grateful. Thankful for that.
God bless.
I hope all the audience folks here are too. But yeah, I think the only thing with it was, like such an incredible surprise for so many people is as we were like facing all this chaos of the pandemic, trying to figure out what that means for all of our lives and all of our businesses. It was really remarkable how, okay, I guess it makes sense in retrospect, but oh my goodness, like the world has to be digital. Like we had no other choice. That was the only channel that existed, to engage with our customers, to engage with, our increasingly distributed teams. And so for a world that's been talking about digital transformation probably for a decade now, just the number of companies, that really responded to the crisis, by truly digitally transforming whole parts of their business. It was remarkable. And so I've just been so impressed by what so many people and so many companies have done
Yeah.
over these past 16 months.
Well, if the rubber ever really needed to meet the road, I think with digital and MarTech, specifically marketing technology, all the stuff we talk and preach about, we really saw it. We're like, oh, wait, we've been talking about this for a while. It's time to really put it in place. How did that affect you and the work you've done in particular with really sizing up the MarTech landscape? I remember, this is how long you been doing the MarTech landscape?
I've been at it for a decade now.
Yeah,
What
and
a strange hobby.
it seems like it's 20 years. And I remember when uh, it it all fit within one slide, and it grew because I started out pretty heavily into MarTech working with, and I started navigating this, but now it's become uh, so large, well past the name. It's the number of companies out there are well past the name. I've heard you on a podcast even talking about when you add in apps and things like that, and each one of those, and a lot of times is a MarTech landscape. It almost becomes an infinitesimal number. How did the last 16 months, affect the work you were doing in assessing what is basically the MarTech landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of feel like MarTech, one of the persistent themes, that over the past 10 years of tracking this that I've heard is blank, blank, blank is going to result in massive consolidation in the
Yeah.
landscape.
Yeah.
The pandemic was no different. I think a lot of people's, first reactions were like, oh, okay, well, this is clearly going to be like this, incredibly painful, experience to so many business, ecosystems. This will be the catalyst that will dramatically consolidate the MarTech landscape. And as with the other catalysts that, we've heard about that, over the past decade, the exact opposite happened. That basically because of the fact that now all of a sudden this incredible motivation of so many companies to figure out how to create digital engagements with their customers, to like digitally distribute their teams, it became this accelerant, for so much, MarTech. To just give you one example, because I've had a hard time like even mapping out the landscape anymore. It's just right. It's well more than 10,000 solutions out there in the world. But some other people have heroically picked it up. And like there was a group that put together a landscape of just virtual event technologies.
Yeah.
And the landscape they came up with like had 800 and some odd solutions just focused, on event technology. And what's interesting about that is, there's a number of those that are just competing directly with each other. You have an incredible set of, choices as you consider, virtual and hybrid events, as you know well. But they're not all directly overlap. They're not all directly head-to-head competitors. There's just so many ways you can like layer on, these apps and engagements and way that you're bringing people in and what happens when they're on stage here and how you follow up with that and the distribution. But you just see this incredible amount of innovation, happening across that entire chain, of virtual and hybrid event engagement, and that's just the tiniest slice, of like what we're all doing online. So yeah, if there's 800 some odd companies, just in that space alone, yeah,
Well,
extrapolate from
yeah.
there.
Well, I mean, it's basically what like when we thought the Earth just fit in our own little, you know, system. Now that we found out there's a lot of planets and stars well beyond, that's where how far it's going.
And actually, by the way, that's a really good metaphor, because one of the big things that's happening in Martech right now is it's no longer just the Martech stack that's somehow
Yeah, yeah.
isolated purely in the marketing department. Increasingly, it's about how marketing integrates, with all these other technology systems, throughout the business that are each going through their own expansion, and rapid innovation. I mean, we could do a whole session just on,
Mhm.
the state of the modern data stack, and all the technologies that are happening there. This is now part of the world that marketing and marketers are interfacing to as well.
So one of the things I was thinking through, getting prepared for this a couple of days ago was, so much of the conversation often about marketing is finding your niche. And we do that with technologies as well. People, especially in the B2B space, they think about the specific problem that each piece of technology fixes. The problem is that those puzzle pieces may fit a specific puzzle section, but then they alter the rest of the puzzle. And if you're working in a brand, and I remember picking up technologies on the brand side a couple of years ago, I was somebody that was buying these different pieces of MarTech, working with the IT department. And it's not as simple anymore as uh, and also because a lot of people are getting away to some degree from enterprise systems unless they're a big company. But it is a small, if you're a small company or medium sized business, it's not easy to take something and integrate it in without it causing some other ripple effects. And I'm curious what advice you give marketers when they're starting to view this technology, how to fit it in with the likely many other pieces they probably
Mhm.
already have.
Yeah, well, you're definitely touching on something that's near and dear to my heart. I mean, this is, yeah, to sort of, skip ahead a little bit. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
reason I joined HubSpot, is
Yeah.
because we have seen for years that, yes, there's this incredible explosion of all these innovative apps and technologies for marketers. But year over year, like, you ask marketers, like, okay, all this amazing stuff is happening, why aren't you taking more advantage of it? And the number one reason is consistently, well, like, we can't get this stuff to integrate together. And it's almost like I'm a old Monty Python fan. I feel like this is like that moment in the Holy Grail where, like, God appears in the clouds above and, Arthur, go and get the Grail. It's like the voice of God is essentially speaking to the MarTech industry, saying, integrate your solutions. Marketers do not want to do that. They shouldn't have to do it. And I really think that is an opportunity for platforms such as HubSpot, obviously with Salesforce, Adobe, the folks who really are like the large centers of gravity in the MarTech industry, to really lean into a platform ecosystem strategy and to work, with all these specialized apps to be able to make, between the specialized app and the platform company, we should be able to do the hard work behind the scenes to allow these things to plug in and connect to each other, so that when marketers, are like, okay, well, if I'm a HubSpot customer, I can go to the HubSpot app marketplace and I can see the, 800, 900 different specialized apps that are out there that have integrations that were built for HubSpot, whatever, that is. And they know that when, we've certified those and they click on them and they add them into their, CRM platform, that it just works. And again, it isn't a perfect world yet. I mean, we're on a journey, all of us. But I feel like that is the mission that MarTech vendors, need to be solving, and not leaving to, like, the poor marketer to,
Yeah.
here's a random Lego set, you figure it out.
Well, one of the things that I noticed about my own background in particular a few years ago was the affinity I had for understanding how the puzzle would fit together for the customer. Mainly because, to your point, most marketers aren't thinking about the end result. I mean, they do, and it's not meant to knock on anybody, but it's very. We think we understand how the pieces fit together, and then the customer sees something different. And I think part of that has really been some of the things I've been working on as research for my book, really thinking about automation and personalization. And there's been such a push, and it's why I'm a big fan of the MarTech conference as well, is that we think about marketing operations people knowing how to assemble all the pieces because you can implement everything in a CRM, you can personalize and put a bracket around something dear first name, but then if you've canceled business with somebody or you've just had a bad service with them and then they send you a fluffy thing that's been spat out of their CRM because they think it's
Asking
another
you to
touch point.
review them on, some sort of
Exactly,
site.
exactly. Please
Like,
leave us
oh
a
yes,
review
I will
because you've
review.
just been the worst service ever. Yeah. So I'm curious how you see at least that role really evolving for how we need to do it. I'm a proponent of it, but it's not everybody's got the ability to it's got the finances to be able to do something like that, to hire that kind of operations person.
Yeah. So this is a great topic because it's funny. Like when I started my blog around Chief Martech, and I really became passionate about what was happening in marketing. It actually wasn't an obsession with like little logos on a slide of all these different marketing technologies. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, what the technologies out there and how they're evolving are fascinating. But to me, the much bigger story is the one that you're getting at here, which is the set of disciplines that we need in the umbrella of modern marketing has evolved. There was a time a decade or more ago where, like the world of, like IT and software development and, that sort of product management mindset, was on the opposite end of the career spectrum from, what marketers, really saw as their mission and, what they were delivering. And what's happened is those two worlds have absolutely, collided together. And so it's really hard to think of marketing in today's digital world without recognizing that there are actual operational components of how these systems and process, are orchestrated together in delivering, that marketing. I mean, don't get me wrong, marketing, all of the things that marketing has traditionally been responsible
Mhm.
for and has to have talent and take leadership for, none of those have gone away. They're as important as ever. But this really is an additive layer of what modern marketing is all about, which is like, okay, how do we have the operational capability below the vision, below the strategy, below the creative to really truly deliver on that? And that's been where the rise of the marketing operations function and marketing technologists have really started to shine. Now, to your point, I mean, like, it's one thing if you're, a large, enterprise company and you probably have a whole marketing operations, marketing technology team. For smaller businesses, right? They don't, it doesn't make economic sense for them to have those dedicated roles. But I think it's still really important to say, okay, whatever your size is, recognizing the operational dimension of marketing is important. And even if it's only someone's like part-time role, it's someone who's raising their hand and taking responsibility for saying, listen, we got to understand this. We got to map it out. And if I'm a small business, it maybe doesn't have to be a super sophisticated or complex thing. Doing fewer things well is
Mhm.
a wonderful strategy. I highly endorse. But you have to have that person thinking about like what's actually happening at an ops and data and system level, because this is how we go from the idea to the actual delivery.
Chief Martech is a fantastic blog. If you're not reading that today, you need to. Scott, your blog is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, what do you think are the questions that the marketer should be asking today that maybe they weren't? I don't know that there's necessarily a massive pre-pandemic set of questions and a post-pandemic set, but there are some different nuances. I've seen, obviously, like a lot of businesses, MarTech included, a lot of people have gotten out of the business, and a lot of this, technology, the smaller companies have either folded or sold out because financing wasn't always their best friend. But it was a minor question that came up in relation to a company I knew of, and I thought how interesting it was that I don't just have to think about the retail business that's going out of business. It might be some small ad tech player who now has disappeared overnight. But that example aside, what are the kind of questions that you think the modern marketer really ought to be asking today, as far as when they're looking at types of technology to potentially integrate into their stack.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this is one of the reasons why I'm a proponent for the platform ecosystem vision of this industry, is because you
Well,
need,
let me add to that. It's
yeah.
also because your MarTech 5000 is very fluid. I
Well,
mean,
exactly, and that's it, and it's going to be fluid. It is going to be fluid for the next decade as well, too. And in many ways, that can be a good thing.
mhm,
Because marketing itself, right? We want the marketplace of ideas. We want this competition with many different martech vendors innovating and trying to come up with better ways to do this or less expensive ways to do this. But the nature of that, while there's a lot of great stuff that comes out of it, the dark side of that is the fact that, yeah, there's inevitably churn. There's companies that go out of business, they get acquired, they get morphed, new ones come up behind them. But that is that churn in the industry is a very real factor. So how do you deal with that? Well, again, I think this is one of the reasons why a platform strategy is just crucial. Because the major platforms, they're not going away.
mhm.
I mean, HubSpot, Salesforce, Adobe, Oracle, Microsoft, I mean, when you're buying those platforms, you've got a level of stability that, we can maybe revisit 20 years from now, but for the next 10 years, you're in pretty, good company. But if you can then have those platforms that are truly open ecosystems, so that you have these more specialized apps that you can plug in, but when you plug those apps in, all of the data is coming into your core platform. All the way in which you're orchestrating the workflow or the automation is happening in that core platform. So that for whatever reason, one of those components goes away, either because, well, I mean, they might go out of business, but also you may just decide, we've used this component for a while and it doesn't do what we want the way we want it, and we see another one that we think will be better. You want the ability to sort of swap that in. I mean, I'll give you a metaphor. It's not this simple, but the image that I hold in my head is, this industry should be asymptotically reaching for the simplicity of like the iPhone or Android.
Mhm,
That I've got my weather app that I use, on my iPhone.
mhm.
If at some point I'm like, I just don't like this one, or I think the data they're
Yeah.
pulling in just isn't the right, I can like toss it off. I can pull in another one, and my iPhone experience doesn't like get dramatically upended as a result of
Mhm.
this. Again, it's never going to be that simple for B2B systems. But if you imagine a continuum, we should be headed towards that. We should be able to get to a place where, listen, if I want to swap in, like, I don't know, pick something, like a different, SEO auditing capability, from one vendor to another, I should be able to swap those into my platforms without it having to become like a major re-architecture of the entire stack. And I think we're making a lot of progress in that direction.
Well, I always sort of use the analogy of a car. There are a lot of people that want to buy parts for their car to, to soup it up. And maybe you change out the catalytic converter or the tires. Those don't necessarily have to only be made by Ford or GM or Honda or whoever it is. It, needs to be something that you can swap out a little more easily and still run the car efficiently.
In
One
my
of the
case,
things,
maybe just the air freshener, but yeah,
the
okay.
air yeah, the little pine tree or the strawberry. Uh, One of the things that I was going to ask you in particular about is respect to data. We've got to be even more conscious, and we're becoming more and more and more conscious as good stewards of customer data. How does it really play into the conversations and discussions you have when looking at the total landscape?
Oh,
Because not everybody is as good as we'd love them to be with data as well.
yeah. Well, again, I can almost feel like I've got like the single note answer. I'm like, you're like, what are the problems of the universe and how do we
Yeah,
solve them? And my answer
yeah,
is platform, platform.
yeah.
I swear it's not just because that's my title at HubSpot. But in all seriousness, right? I mean, part of what these platforms are doing is saying, listen, if we can have a common system of record where all data flows into it, because first and foremost, what you need visibility. I need to see where all this data is, and I need to be able to normalize it, I mean, if I've got data like spread across, dozens of different apps and they're sort of
Mhm.
siloed and there's no visibility, that actually makes the challenge of just managing with compliance and privacy, and data quality in general just, so challenging, but if you can then pull these things into these centralized systems of record, you've now got one common place where, in a number of cases, the platforms themselves are providing these controls for support for GDPR and other regulations. But also, if you decide you want something more than what the platform itself does, you can now have a third-party product that has access. It has that visibility to that common data repository, and it can put a layer, of data governance and compliance management on top of that. And you see a bunch of vendors in that space, companies like OneTrust and DataGrail, and
Mhm.
so from a technical perspective, it's absolutely doable. From a marketer's perspective, again, I'm way in that camp of feeling like this transformation to a focus on data privacy has been one of the best things that's ever happened to marketing, because on the other side of that, we have just gotten so much better at managing our data control and our data quality, which doesn't just help us with living up to requirements from a compliance perspective. It also helps us with things like for AI, right? I mean, like, so many of the cool things that are happening on the leading edge of marketing now are about these machine learning algorithms, that help identify all sort of patterns and predictive opportunities for us. But there's nothing actually super magical about these machine learning algorithms. At the end of the day, they work well or poorly based on the quality of data that you feed into them. And so, as marketers kind of got forced into the data quality game, because of compliance management,
Mhm.
we've ended up with this actually incredible side effect benefit that now the quality of our data that we can start to use and leverage in these machine learning, capabilities and features. It's like the bonus win that
Yeah.
we're getting out of
Yeah, I know that my own experience working in big data when I worked for Axiom in particular, they housed roughly 200 of the Fortune 5's customer data. And so they'd have a safe room, and basically it was a floor where everything that we couldn't get access to was in a safe room with special locks and keys and all that good stuff. And I remember thinking about the power of data and how, if everyone evolved with their technology to be able to leverage the kind of data that was being able to be consumed, it would be scary. And now we're getting to that exact point, because we're able to leverage so much that it's almost it's just become almost too much. So another thing I remember, though, and to kind of lean into customer data, I remember a conversation I've had with a mutual friend, David Robb, about CDPs, and he leads the CDP Institute. CDPs were the big flavor of the day in, what, 2018, 2019. They were all the rage, as the kids would say. Do you see that still, or where do you think the needle is moving towards, at least as far as types of different technologies to that people really need to keep on their radar today?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, if you ask, the head of platform ecosystem a question, the answer is probably platform
Yeah.
ecosystem. You
Yeah.
ask the, head of the CDP Institute, a
Oh
question,
yeah.
the answer, it's probably CDP. Actually, I joke. David's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend just, anyone who's listening to this, sign up to his daily newsletter. Just brilliant, and a really funny guy too. But to answer the question here, I think part of the game that MarTech vendors play, I mean, it's a marketing game, but MarTech vendors are particularly susceptible to it. We bring that DNA of marketing and the tech world together, and we are just fascinated by labels and acronyms, and all of this. And so even like David Robb has like spent years wrestling with trying to nail down what is or isn't a CDP, because
Mhm.
almost everything now says, oh, well, we're a CDP. Oh, you want to buy a CDP? Right, we're a CDP. And so I find it helpful to sort of step back and like say, all right, let's forget about the nomenclature for a moment, because it is a very fluid and fuzzy set of nomenclature and say like, okay, what are the actual use cases? What are we trying to do? What we're trying to do is we're trying to pull all this data we have, on customers and their different touch points. We want to have it in, a system of record. We want to have it normalized, so that we're recognizing the same customer, across their different touch points with us. And then we want to be able to operationalize that. We want to be able to take actions on that. And so I think that capability is absolutely table stakes, and so the question then becomes like, okay, well, what tools are you using to get to that? And this is where things are blending between, CDP, new CDP entrants, traditional CRM platforms that have all, expanded and adapted to this. So, my goodness, it's kind of hard to find, one of the larger CRM platforms out there that hasn't, maybe made a CDP acquisition. In the case of HubSpot, we're not really about acquiring pieces of technology and sticking them together. We do a little bit more of an organic approach, but our whole vision of like how we approach, customer data is like, how do we model it, across all these different touch points and unify it? And so I would say, this doesn't just apply to data. It's really anything you're doing in marketing, and you're looking to a marketing technology solution to solve for you. My advice is to just first and foremost, just get really clear on the use cases. Like, what is it you are trying to actually do? And then hold these, prospective vendors to show me how this actually works, with your product. Don't just take the canned demo, don't just read the like glossy
The
PowerPoint,
brochure. Yeah.
have them like, show you for your use case, how does this actually work? And I think that actually, will get you to the ground truth of this, more than like, what's a CDP? What's a journey orchestration engine? What's a
Yeah.
whatever
Well,
the next term
that's a fair
becomes.
point because I know that I have pushed back on MarTech vendors before who, when I was on the brand side in particular, who came to me with their features and benefits. Their solution was going to fix whatever my problem was. And I said, nope, here's what my problem is, the use case. Help me figure out how to fix that. And I uh, was probably a little bit tough on them, but I got what I needed to do to fix my problem for my customer, not help them uh, implement something so that they could reflect just a good quarterly numbers, for their sales revenue. So I think that's a challenge that it's okay to push back and present your problem back to a company because we've all got limited dollars to spend. I don't care even if you're a big company to implement the right kind of Martech. Um, I know one of the things also that David does well, though, and to your point, he does a really good presentation about what is a CDP versus what is a data lake, what is a data warehouse, and he really divides that up. And I can tell you, as recently as within a few months ago, this just hit me again with someone who called something a CDP. It was clearly not a CDP, but we get glossy pulled into that, from looking at the brochure, thinking this is going to fix all of our problems. So I love the fact that you reiterated about, fixing that problem and that solution rather than just what looks good on paper. What is it that excites you or not excites you today about MarTech? What are the advancements that we should be on the lookout for that you're starting to see from a 30,000-foot view, especially as you put the landscape together for this year?
Yeah. So I think, boy, there's there's so many things. Let me pick two. So the first we were talking a little bit about earlier, which is Martech is reintegrating back into the rest of the organization. Part of the reasons like, Martech became its own specialized field is, to be honest, the needs and the innovation that was happening in digital marketing outpaced the ability for, quite
Mhm.
frankly, a lot of enterprise systems, a lot of enterprise IT to keep up, and so this really required, marketers and, the vendor community that supported them to be able to say, okay, listen, let's move faster than that. Let's build these solutions that are really targeted for just what marketing needs to be able to do. That was great for the time. It made a lot of progress. But we're now in a world where the rest of the business is catching up. That being digitally transformed doesn't just mean that you do digital marketing. It means actually the way your whole business operates is being orchestrated by software that, has a common data foundation that connects all these dots. And so I think this is a really exciting time for marketing because, we're now sort of reintegrating back into the larger organization, that it's not just our view of customer data, but it's how do we have a, common set of customer data, that's leveraged by marketing and sales and customer support, or, if we're digital products, like our own product organization. When we think about, like workflow orchestration at this point, right? It's not just about like, some sort of, marketing automation. It's like, oh, well, how do we do these things, that trigger some activities in marketing teams, others in sales, others in customer support. And so there's just a tremendous amount of innovation happening both in the technology, but also in the practices, around marketing operations and marketing tech for this reintegration. The second thing I think is super exciting is, I mean, everyone at this point has probably heard and is maybe now sick of, the phrase no code, which, to be honest, is actually a really remarkable thing. And to me, it's not just
It
like
is
limited.
fascinatingly remarkable to me.
And I don't limit it to saying just like, oh, this lets me program apps without actually programming. I actually look at it through a bigger lens of saying, ultimately, what the no code movement is about is technology has advanced to a level where all of a sudden we've got these set of tools, whether it's for creating software or orchestrating workflows or integrating apps or doing like graphic design or editing podcasts, where these tools have gotten, so sophisticated, but they're able to then pull all that sophistication under this really simple, easy to use interface that lets a non-expert do a lot of the basic tasks that previously, I needed a software engineer to do. I needed a graphic designer to do. I needed, like some sort of like enterprise architect to figure out how we were going to connect these two things together. And don't get me wrong, it's not that like programming's not relevant or enterprise architects are relevant. I mean, they absolutely are. There's a level of sophistication you get to where those talents are
Yeah.
absolutely still applicable. But what's so cool is like this level below that of all these things that were relatively simple tasks, but just in order to do them, you needed this level of expertise that was out of reach for most people. Economically, it didn't even make sense to say, well, yeah, I suppose it would be nice to have this workflow work this way, but it's not worth me spending a bunch of money to like have a, like software engineer like custom build this for me. But now I can just sit down in front of a screen and like, yeah, I'll drag this and connect this to that. And I want this trigger and boom, it's done. And you're like, hey, that's pretty cool. And so I think this whole, between these two things, like integrating, marketing back into the rest of the org and, leveraging more of these no code tools to like just empower everyone throughout marketing to have greater capabilities at their fingertips. I mean, you can tell I'm like giddy. Like
Yeah.
I feel like we're at the beginning now of a whole new, wave,
It
of marketing.
it's scary 20 years ago when I was coding in HTML and writing a little bit of Java and everything else I mean, somebody brought up ASP.NET the other day. I was thinking about an old website, how that's like dinosaur language anymore when you think about it. And 6 months ago, a team that I work with we were going through the process of implementing a new site. Actually, it's a little more than a year ago. And the whole argument that I was making to this team was we need to decide now on no code or code. We can figure that out. We can figure out how quickly we can get to market. So I think the good side is with no code is we've gotten to a place where we've become so complainy as a society that our complaints are far outpacing sometimes what we really need to focus on.
Mhm.
And what no code allows us at least to do is create a site, for example, that's simple for the user. And for a lot of cases, even with like the Squarespaces of the world, you can still inject a fair amount of code in. And that's, I mean, I remember going from writing straight, binary code to getting Dreamweaver, thinking how much of a
Mhm.
watershed moment that was as a web developer and then you'd have a lot of people that would poo-poo that because you couldn't do everything in Dreamweaver that you could do from simply writing code. But that's light years behind us now, and I'm more excited than ever with the capabilities of getting something to scale to market quickly, to focus on, again, what we need to be able to do for our end customers, which is not add these internal bells and widgets that make our developers or our marketers fight, but make it a site that's easy to use and navigate for our customers. And that's been a big complaint, for me, that I'm seeing a lot of the code, no code help solve. I get excited about.
Yeah,
Um,
amen to that. Although I will say what's again exciting is you knew I was going to come back to platform ecosystem. It's been 5 minutes. I haven't used that phrase. Um, but it's the fact that
it's
like
my drinking game, Scott. I'm drinking coffee.
we don't, a lot of these things that we used to have to think of as dichotomies, and build versus buy is like a classic
Mhm.
example of that.
Yeah,
What's really exciting is we're getting to a world where there's almost a hybridization of this, which is to say, listen, I don't want to reinvent the wheel from scratch. And,
mhm.
I want to buy a platform out of the box that does, almost everything I need. And then there's maybe a bunch of stuff I want to be able to customize that I want to do through no code. But if the platforms are still designed in a way that they say, okay, if there is some piece of this, that isn't in the core platform, or it doesn't make sense to do from a, no code workflow, and you want to be able to plug in a professional software engineer to bring a piece
Yeah,
to the puzzle, having that option. And so that basically when we are building things, when we're bringing in our software engineers, we're applying their talent and their time to the pieces of the equation that they are uniquely well suited to be able to do. And I think this sort of blending of, the hybridization of build and buy
mhm.
is, again, kind of another one of these trends we just sort of see in how the MarTech world is maturing.
Well, and I don't think, we have to necessarily wrap ourselves in what a lot of people call the prison of two ideas. For example, for a site, it doesn't always have to be one or the other. It could be that one is a temporary solution that can be replaced by a much more robust system, for example, with websites. And so, for a lot of people, especially with startups, you can get something off the ground quickly and inject something later. Let's talk a little bit about the skills today. The market's still hot. When you think of how someone should really learn and train themselves, I think of this, and I have to stop and pause my own self with this, because I worked in recruiting years and years ago and then advanced, oddly enough, into MarTech, which was part of my background. And I think still, though, about the skills that we need, and the market's so hot uh, for MarTech people as well. Where does somebody really go about learning how to connect these dots that we're talking about? Obviously, I'm going to encourage them to go to Chief Martech and follow your work and my podcast, which we talk about a lot. But I often think about this as a topic that you understand, that I understand, but a lot of people, it's still a little bit Greek. And so I'm thinking of how to help educate people connect those dots, and where that risk necessarily where to start. Where do you give advice for? You're the
Yeah.
godfather.
I'd A/B test an offer they can't refuse. Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's a hard one in the sense that the space just keeps moving, and so the traditional channels we've always thought of for saying like, oh well, I go to university and I have a set of courses I take there, and maybe I major in marketing technology. It's actually interesting. You're starting to see some universities develop programs around
Mhm.
that, but the truth is that while there's certainly fundamentals, that you can learn, and you can learn these through good business classes, operations, through some stuff like statistics, maybe a little bit of computer science. I mean, just some of the basic understanding of like the framework of like, oh, well, how does the world work, with the, digital dynamics and data. But when it comes to the actual implementation of what's happening in these marketing stacks, yeah, they're very far ahead, of the institutional learning. And so the places where I think people tend to get the most real knowledge of this is a combination of, uh, surprisingly, actually the vendors. I mean, I don't want to just plug HubSpot. HubSpot has our HubSpot Academy and a great thing for that. But like I think of Salesforce and like Salesforce, Trailhead. I mean, the quality of content that some of these leading vendors have to say, not only teach you how to use their tool, but the good ones are really also teaching you to think about like, okay, what am I trying to do with the tool? How do I put
Mhm.
this in a larger context? And because they're developing this stuff at the cutting edge, they tend to keep those curriculums, pretty up to date. Another great place to learn is through your peers. I mean, this is one of the best things that I can't wait till we now get back to in person, conferences and events, because for all the other, things that you can get out of this, those connections with peers and the
Mhm.
ability to develop that peer network and tap into these communities is just that's again where you're learning from
Great
real
point.
people on the ground who are actually doing this stuff, what works, what doesn't. And then I guess the third thing is I'd say there is no substitute at this point for actually experimenting this with this stuff yourself. And while I certainly encourage most marketing teams to have a bit of an experimental sandbox where they're, able to try and learn, new ways of doing things, for people who really want to make their living in marketing ops and marketing tech, I always encourage them like start a side project. Not because you want to make a side project business on its own, although who knows, you never know how these things, work out. It's more of like just have a sandbox where you can start to play with these things. And particularly so many of these, MarTech technologies out there, have a move to like this freemium model where if you're just a small little business or you're doing this just as a project, so much of this stuff you can either get for free or it's like super cheap. And so it allows you to have this environment where you can start to pull the, strings and be able to see, oh, this is how this works. And this is how this, and you're doing it in a very low stakes, low risk, process. But that hands-on learning of what works and what doesn't, I mean, that's invaluable. So if you can get that in your official job role,
Mhm.
fantastic. But if you're trying to bootstrap your way up to that, man, start a digital side project.
Yeah, well, I don't market myself as a referral engine for anybody, but to your point, I get as many or more questions about how did this work or that work, in particular with a lot of the MarTech or ad tech pieces that I know and have worked with over the years for a lot of the Fortune 200. And I know how much weight that carries when people ask me, did this work? Or, was it the brochure? And, to your point, all the glossy stuff aside in the MarTech world, referrals go a long way. I'm going to pivot back though. I got a good question from Siska, who asked, "Would you suggest the no-code development platform for a startup business versus an established business?"
Yeah, well, I will say it's the startups that have taken the most advantage of no
Yes.
code platforms. In fact, actually, I mean, again, some of these companies like, Bubble or whatnot, as a platform comes to mind. It's been like a godsend, to start because it just, even if they say, like, all right, this isn't the final version of what I'm doing,
Mhm.
but I'm just using this to like rapidly prototype and like learn what works in the market and find that product market fit.
Mhm.
So the adoption in the startup world is very strong. With enterprises, it's been slower, mostly because again, this is a cultural shift.
Mhm.
Enterprises still have had these like very strong hierarchies of like, okay, these are the people who build things, and these are the people who use things that other people build. And this notion of saying, well, wait a second. Now these people who used to just be users can now be builders and makers themselves. It presents cultural challenge. It presents governance challenges. But you're seeing both enterprises and these no code tools working together to solve them. I mean, like, I don't know, like another no code tool that's very popular is Airtable,
Yeah.
and I think they've done a really great job. They've got incredible adoption, at the enterprise level. Workflow automation. I think of Workato, right? I mean, like half of
Yeah.
their selling proposition enterprises is not just that people can do these like no code workflows, but they've now got this overarching governance and visibility and tracking this sort of stuff in a way that like the IT or ops professionals can sort of still keep their arms around it. And so I think that's evolving both on a tech level and a cultural level, but today it's definitely gotten a lot more traction and success in the startup side of the spectrum.
Just a reminder too for everybody. It was a great question from Siska. If you have any questions you want to ask Scott Brinker, we've got just a few more minutes left, so please make certain that you ask. Scott, sorry, and I'm pulling something up here. Bear with me just one second. Uh, h- how do you look at implementing stuff for yourself at HubSpot? I mean, again, you look at the landscape out in the yonder, if you will, but you as a marketer yourself now, understanding how this landscape, how do you start pulling all the pieces together? Because HubSpot's obviously a company that's grown and grown well. It's not just itself, its own platform with no other technology pieces supporting it.
Yeah, it's a great question. Although I have to disclaim, yeah, the work I do at HubSpot is
Yeah.
very much with our partner
Oh yeah.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
And like there's a whole team in our marketing organization on marketing ops. We've reorganized the company around this revenue ops function that actually has a bunch of these ops functions now connected across marketing, sales, customer success, and product. And so, yeah, we want to get one of them on yeah, the panel to discuss that. But I find it even in my environment, like to this no code thing, so our partner ecosystem is growing. We're adding more and more partner managers to help manage those relationships. As new partners come in, it used to be like there was this trickle, and I'd answer them myself,
Mhm.
and like,
Yeah.
oh, you should talk to so and so, But now we realize it's at a scale where we need to be able to start to automate, as these new opportunities come in, make sure that we very quickly get them to the right partner manager with the right information, and we didn't have to go to IT. We didn't have to go to, like the product team. Like we basically went into our HubSpot, instance, like, oh, all right, well, let's configure this workflow. And this
Mhm.
is the logic we want here. And bam,
Right.
and we're done. Oh, we need a different form for this. Okay, let's create that and publish it. And it's so much fun. You're just like, okay, if there's something I need to move forward, just the great thing about these tools is you're hitting fewer and fewer technical roadblocks. That the distance between an idea, and actually getting something out into the world, it's just shrinking. And so, yeah, we we take full advantage of that ourselves.
I got two more questions I want to ask that came from the audience just now. One from Megan or Megan. Apologies if I said it wrong, but you talked about the importance of different platforms speaking to each other. And you're important. How important is that your social media platform? And let me show more. Uh, social media platform and SEO platforms speak to your CRM.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do that. I mean, again, you're setting me up with that. You just wanted
No,
me to
no,
say
she did
platform
actually write that
ecosystem
one
one
out.
more
That was a
time,
very good.
right?
Yeah,
there's a
put that
bet,
one on the
there's a
tee for
side
you.
bet going on in the audience. How many times can we get Scott to say platform ecosystem? All right, well, but in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, right? Certainly from a social side, right? You're wanting to be able to connect this insights, particularly with customer support. Like people are so used to using social media, as a channel for alerting companies when they're having challenges. You need to identify those. You need to make sure those things are tracked. You need to make sure they're in the same system of record. So, as your example, Kenny, earlier, that like if they're in the middle of a support issue, don't be sending them like marketing promotions to go review you on Yelp. So yes, bring them together.
Yeah, agreed. I just sat through a demo with somebody yesterday talking about that. I mean, other than that, just connecting the dots can help a lot of your advertising as well. To throw that on top of it. So, our 60. Here's another one from Rachel who asks: Our 60-year-old D2C company is in the process of migrating our ERP and ESP from antiquated systems that had little to no flexibility to modern systems that have workflow and AI capabilities. Any advice on what to watch for or what to be sure to do or not to do during a process like this?
Yeah. Well, wow. First of all, kudos. I mean, I really appreciate how challenging that is.
Yes.
And it's challenging not so much from a purely technical level because I mean the things you can now build and recreate in the cloud, in many ways it's so much easier than how a lot of these legacy systems got built. But I think the thing I would flag, what I've seen so many companies struggle with when they go through that, is a lot of these legacy systems, they're not very well documented. They like people have maybe the core set of things, like they know, oh, this is this function and this is this use case. But because they've been around for so long, people have created very often all sorts of like workarounds, and their own custom little things that aren't necessarily visible in like the core legacy system, but they're actual aspects of like how the business is operating and running. And it's very easy when doing these, migrations, to like a whole new generation in the cloud. You just don't catch these things. Like it's very hard. And so just the more you can engage as wide of a possible audience inside the organization to understand the different like ops related workarounds that are attached to that, just to make sure that we catch them. And,
Mhm.
when 0 day comes, it's not all of a sudden a surprise.
Last question. This one's from me. How have you seen, or when you think about the last 16 months and everybody being forced into a remote world, specifically also with supporting MarTech, and I think about a lot of our friends that are out in the Bay Area. Everybody moved. They got away to different locations, like places where I live that doesn't have state income tax, and more affordable places to live. But do you think with the more remote world that we're going to, I've worked remotely for years. I work for an agency out of New York, but I don't live in New York. The more and more that this evolves, do you see anything that necessarily raises any interest or disinterest to you in the MarTech, how that's gonna affect it? Because used to be that a lot of the coders we needed to advance things in MarTech only were located in an office on a floor in a company. Now that has completely changed, and I haven't really been able to read the tea leaves yet with how technology, for companies in the MarTech space, the evolution will evolve, but I'm sure that you've started to see some of that as well.
Yeah, well, my impression is for most tech companies, even before the pandemic, they were leaning into remote because it's simply a matter of competitive dynamics.
Yeah.
There's so much need for talent,
Mhm.
in these businesses, and the talent is so widely distributed. It doesn't all live, in the 20 square mile radius of your headquarters. That to be able to develop the culture and the operational capabilities to be able to work with people from anywhere in the world, it's just a huge competitive advantage. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot about in person dynamics. And I think, probably the most exciting thing to me is this vision of, hybrid, businesses on the other side of this. That, yes, we fully support all kinds of, like remote, participation and, remote staff, but we also have these other mechanisms by which we can bring people together in the right way, and teams can come in and do this piece of it. I think we're going to get to a place where there is the best of both worlds. As far as MarTech goes, I guess one last thing I'll say is, again, just like being forced to be entirely digital with our customers has been a great catalyst in accelerating, how we actually develop our muscle groups around, digital marketing and sales. It's kind of the same thing, with a remote and more distributed workforce at this point. Is we are developing new skills and capabilities, like this whole stuff about, no code, and, the idea that,
Yeah.
there's this wider group of makers, this sort of reset around organizational models in a remote or hybrid world actually is facilitating the transition to being able to adopt some of those more distributed capabilities and technologies. And so I think when we get to the other side of this in a few years, we're going to look back at that as a catalyst and a huge win,
Yeah,
too.
no, and that's one of the real benefits of no code too that I was just thinking of, the time zone differences. Although we don't necessarily need to physically always be in a room, the capabilities of not having to only be on a call connecting Boston and San Francisco, and the hours of difference in between, where you only had a sweet spot of like 2 hours in the middle of the day to connect. Now, the capabilities of being able to pull a lot of this technology together at different hours than we had before is really an advancement. I mean, it's nice to hear too that there's marketing technology life outside of Boston, Austin, and the Bay. So, Scott, it's always an honor to speak with you, sir. I'm so glad to call you a friend, and so thankful to have you. Any parting thoughts for you before we get out of here?
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And yeah, the audience, I would say, listen, believe me, I know it's just a lot. There's just so much happening in the world. And I just want to assure you, it's not you. It's
Yeah.
all of us. It's me. Like I wake up every morning, I'm like, oh wow, that's new. I didn't see that one coming. And so I think just, always taking a deep breath and saying, listen, we're not going to learn it all. We're not going to change it all.
Yeah.
What matters is every day we wake up and we're willing to learn more and we're willing to take steps forward. Um, it's a great time to be in marketing. I think you're going to have a blast.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, Scott, again, thank you again for your time. Wish you the best, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.